All right, well, thanks for watching this video today. This is week 15 of fall semester. This is the final week of class. I don't have any more class after today. Just got to get my final papers in and done, and then we're done with the semester. It's been crazy that it's been 15 weeks. It feels like forever, but yet it feels like we just started just like a really recently. It was so wild. It went by real fast. So let's get into what we learned this week in our final week. In my interfaith class, we did a lot of review of what we had learned over the last 15 weeks, basically, of what does it take to have good interfaith opportunities in your community. So we talked about things like remembering to have a good vision. What is your vision? What do you want to do? What is the goal you have to make changes in your community? Having a good vision will help you to think through what groups am I going to need to interact with to help us get this accomplished. Having a knowledge base, that appreciative knowledge of other religions, is very important. So if you take the time to actually learn about other religions in your community, then you can start to see more opportunities to work together. This is a really important thing to be looking at. Nurture that interfaith cooperation. Reach out, talk with people of other faiths. Start building those connections with them. Get that social capital going, which will allow you to trust each other and work together on projects. The more you have that trust with each other, the better it's going to be in the long run. Now, realize too that there's a difference between diversity and what we call pluralism. Diversity is understanding that there's a lot of different religious faiths in your community. That's diversity, okay? It just is what it is. Basically, pluralism is the definition of pluralism. This is a specific concept in interfaith work. Pluralism is actively utilizing that diversity for a common cause, whether that's help with feeding the homeless, building a shelter, doing some kind of interfaith concerts or work with each other, interfaith dialogues. Those are things that are going to be really good to do. And so that's pluralism, is working together, having different groups come together to help each other out. Five reasons that are really good to encourage pluralism in your community is, of course, one, there's more understanding. There's going to be less prejudice. Take time to understand other religions. The more you understand about them, the more you'll realize you have a lot in common. Okay, a couple of examples of this is, one is when you look at Judaism. There is a branch of Judaism called Messianic Judaism. Messianic Judaism are people who are Jews but believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And so you might be thinking, I didn't know that some Jews believed that Jesus was Messiah. Yeah, they're called Messianic Jews. That's a type of Judaism. Now, the beauty of Judaism, as far as like with Christianity, is understanding the Bible. The Old Testament is one where you can come together to learn from and realize that Jesus was a Jew. I mean, he's Jewish heritage. He's of the tribe of Judah, to be a descendant of King David. So he is a Jew. That's his genealogical heritage. So understanding them will help you out. Also, Islam. A lot of people do not realize that Islam believes Jesus Christ is a great prophet, that you should listen to his words and teachings. They don't see him as, the son of God and a savior, but he is a spectacularly great prophet, and we should listen to him. So most people don't realize that Islam believes in Christianity to an extent. They believe in a lot of similar philosophies because early Islamic leaders believed that what Jesus taught was important. And so there are actually some similarities and connections between Islam and Christianity. Those are good to know. If you want to get to know Christians, learn about them. Realize that Protestantism and Catholicism are different, but there are some interesting concepts and ideas. Again, they all go back to using the Bible. So even Mormonism, talk to Mormons in your community, get to know them and how are they different from Protestants and other things. The more you learn about each other, the less prejudice there's going to be. Also strengthening that social cohesion, being able to, the more you have those connections, the more people can say, I can rely on you and I can trust you and we can work together on things, which is bridging that social capital, bringing people together. So, and it helps because also when you have that pluralism, when people recognize, hey, you might believe about salvation different than me, but it doesn't mean we can't have good dialogue and conversations. It doesn't mean we can't help in our community. If you think about an earthquake, let's say like a massive earthquake, we just had one recently, 7.0 off the coast of Oregon and California. Let's say that hit on land. Let's say it was a destructive earthquake. Nobody's going to really care if you're Mormon or Protestant or Sikh or anything. It's about first aid, helping people, helping them find homes, helping get people to shelters, dealing with first aid issues, helping people clean out of the disaster. So some of those layers that sometimes get in our way of talking to our neighbors in a normal situation will go away because we're just people in a disaster that need to help each other to deal with this. So I realize the more you can erase those lines before a disaster, the better your response in the disaster is going to be. So work on pluralism. Now, if you are LDS, I know in Utah, one thing that is happening is they're bringing in a new calling at the stake and ward level called a communications specialist. And so if you've heard about this, if you've seen it, put it in the comments. I'd like to see which wards and what areas are adopting this. I know the Utah area, which is a little bit of southern Idaho and most of Utah, are putting this in. That they're already doing this at the area level. They already have somebody in place that's helping to do this. The communication specialist job, for lack of a better term, is an interfaith calling. Your job is to work with nonprofits. Your job is to work with other religions to come together for community benefit. You're going to do interfaith work. Basically, that's what your whole job is going to be. So learning about interfaith stuff and how you can work together is going to help your calling be better. So those are good things to do. So the LDS Church is getting into interfaith dialogue and interfaith work. So if you're outside the Utah area and you've heard about this calling and your ward or stake is doing this, let me know. I'd love to hear how far out this is extending and if you've done anything with it or not. But it's coming. We're going to be doing more with interfaith work. So in fact, let me explain something about interfaith work that I've learned just myself. This is before I got into this class. But this is one reason I believe personally why interfaith work is a very important thing. When you think of like the last days prophecies and things like that, there is one that does not get mentioned very often, but I think it's a very effective one. It's been proven to be quite accurate. This was written down by Mosiah Hancock in his journal. Mosiah Hancock went and visited Joseph in jail at Carthage like the week before he died, basically. And in that meeting, Mosiah Hancock says in his journal that he met with Joseph and Joseph told him about some future events. He said that in America, we'll have two great political parties, that one will be called the Republicans, the other will be called the Democrats. And you have to realize that in the 1840s, it was Democrats and Whigs were the main parties at the time. But eventually, the Republican Party would come around, basically, shortly after that. So these two parties would get really big in America, and they would go to war with each other. And out of them would come I believe it was called the American Independent Party. It could be Independent American Party. I'm not sure, either Independent or Americans First. There actually is an American Independent and an Independent American Party in America today. One of them was started in Utah in the 1970s. The other one was the one that Ross Perot and others ran on as an independent, basically for presidency. He says they'll go to war, this other party will come out, and then America will spend her strength warring in foreign lands, which if you look at the last 20 or 30 years, we've spent a lot of time and efforts fighting in other people's land. But then he goes on to say that eventually not a global conspiracy, but there'll be a group of countries that'll come together and say, let us go divide up the lands of Americas, and then they'll come fight us here. Then this is World War III, basically. They'll come fight us here. We'll have to fight them off. At some point, half the army will give up. The U.S. half the U.S. Army gives up. The military is cut in half because they surrender. The other half keeps fighting on. So it looks like America is about to lose this war. And then around that time, that the brethren, the leadership of the church, will rally the righteous of America together to go provide the balance of power. And the army will say, yes, give us men who can talk with God to help us. And then America wins the battle, we win it, and the other countries go back to their locations, and we rebuild America, basically. What I find interesting about this is in this revelation, he does not say that the leadership of the church is going to call the Mormon people together to go fight. He says he'll call the righteous of America to go fight, which means people who are sincerely trying to follow God. That doesn't necessarily have to mean only members of the LDS Church. There are lots of people who are sincerely trying to follow God that are not members of the church. Some of them just don't know where to look or why they should look at the LDS Church. They're sincerely trying to find the truth. They're trying to follow God the best they can, but they just haven't realized about the LDS Church type idea. So here's the thing that's interesting. How in the world are the brethren, the leaders of the LDS Church, going to fulfill this prophecy, assuming it's all going to be true, which so far it's been pretty accurate? If this is true, if this prophecy that Mosiah Hancock wrote down is legit, then how are the brethren going to rally the righteous of America who aren't LDS, unless there are connections in these other churches, unless these other churches can connect with the LDS Church and go, look, we're willing to work together on stuff. If you think about it, what Mosiah Hancock describes is the largest pluralist concept, the largest pluralist opportunity in the entire country of America, to bring all religions together that want to follow God and that want America to survive, to go fight this war. So in a way, pluralism and interfaith relationships are going to save America. It's not enough to just be Catholic and American, or evangelical and American, or even Muslim and American. It's going to take us all coming together to say, we are followers of God, and we're pushing against the things that are challenging and trying to go against us. We'll have to come together as a religious group to get America to survive. So will interfaith work be important? I think so. I've known that about that revelation for at least 20 years now, if not longer. And I'd never thought about it from a pluralist standpoint or interfaith standpoint until I took this class and went, oh my gosh, this is prophecy. Interfaith dialogue is going to save the nation. So really kind of cool idea. So take it for what it is. If you want to believe about it, you can go look up Mosiah Hancock's Revelation. I think it's part of the Joseph Smith Papers. In fact, there's a book, Mosiah Hancock's Diary. You can go read it. It's all there. You can look it up and read it for yourself and see it. But I really think I hadn't thought about it from a pluralistic or an interfaith standpoint, but that's exactly what it's talking about. So I think interfaith is going to play a bigger role in the salvation of America than we think. And so this is important, that we learn to work together with other religions, to look past differences. We can be different and disagree on what salvation means or how to attain salvation. But let's learn to work together on principles and ideas and values that will be important for our community. So that's kind of my plea, to do that and to think more about that. So that's something for us to think about. If you have comments or questions or thoughts and ideas on that, love to read them in the comment section, and we'll have more discussion down there. So let's get into my Mormonism class. We spent this week talking not so much about the history of Mormonism, but since we had kind of worked our way up to the 1960s, 70-ish time frame in Mormonism, this week we spent time looking at what does the future hold for Mormonism? What's happening now and where is it going, basically. So we looked at some of the trends that are there. Now, the main trend that we looked at was about the new coming adults into Mormonism. Who are those who are going to be the new ward leaders and stake leaders and people in Mormonism? And that's millennials, okay? Millennials are getting into their 30s. They're getting into those places where they can be parts of ward councils, parts of bishoprics, parts of stake presidencies, high councils. So millennials are getting into that group. But what's happening with them? And what does that mean going forward with the church? So we looked at 3 talks given at Claremont University in their Mormon Studies conference they do every year. And if that sounds weird, like what is a Mormon Studies conference? I've never heard that term before. So inside the scholarly discipline of history, there's religious studies. Inside religious studies, there is Mormon studies. So this is a subset of religious studies that are just designed to be scholarly work to think about and talk about things around Mormonism, Mormon history, Mormon theology, Mormon issues and topics. It's really cool. If you go to YouTube and type in Claremont Mormon Studies Conference, you can find all their videos. There's some great videos out there from this. So realize if you do that, Claremont is Claremont. Okay, that's Claremont. It's a university in California. They've been a pioneer of Mormon studies work for a long time, and then they bring in scholars from all over the country to talk about Mormon studies and other issues. So we listened to 3 talks from them, basically. The first one we listened to was from Matthew Loveland. These are their 2019 talks. He actually talked about Catholic millennials to understand what is the Catholic Church like when in reaction with millennials. So some interesting statistics he brought up. If you're Catholic, this will be really fascinating for you. If you're not Catholic, it's still interesting to understand some of the demographics of Catholicism in today's world. So he found out that the average age of a Catholic today is around 46. So Catholics are Gen X. That's people born in the mid to late 70s and early to mid 80s, which is sad to say has been almost 50 years since that time frame. That's really sad. You know, when I used to be, I thought of 50 years ago, I was talking about the 1950s, but not anymore. That's really sad. But that's so majority of Catholics are, the average Catholic is Gen X. So millennials are still a younger demographic inside the Catholic Church. 53% of Catholics are women. 58% of Catholics are white. Average income is $55,000, and 54% of Catholics are married. So just a little over half of Catholics are married. The others are single or divorced. It was interesting that 2 in 10 millennials that are Catholic have what they consider strong affiliation. They strongly believe in the church. 2 in 10, that's 20% of millennials. I think it's just millennials who's interviewing for this part. 20% of millennials have a strong affiliation with the church. 20% feel confident in the leadership of the church. Only 20%. Millennial attendance, in fact, the millennials that go to church actively in Catholicism, 17%. So they're not very active in organized religion. Millennials just aren't as far as how they're looking in Catholicism. Now, if we look at what's interesting is beliefs, 85% of Catholic millennials believe in life after death. They believe there's something else, but they don't believe in organized religion. Those 2 beliefs are separating, that my belief in Jesus or my belief in God and my belief in an organized church are becoming divided. Those are pulling apart as 2 different issues, basically. When it comes to moral issues, millennials tend to be more liberal in their views. Like boomers, sex is only reserved for marriage and shouldn't be done any other time. Millennials, sex is okay, except if you're married, you can only be monogamous. You shouldn't cheat on your spouse or anything like that. Outside of that, if you're not married, you're okay to do it with whoever, basically. So it's an interesting change that we've seen. it was interesting too in looking at that. Just the millennials are more worried about uh, your like LGBTQ topics, social issues, women's rights issues, things like that. Whether you are a smoker or a drinker or other things is less of a concern. We're worried about social issues more. So they're a lot more socially active when it comes to like social issues and things. The next lecture we heard was actually from Jenna Reese. She is an awesome LDS scholar. I've met her actually. She came in and taught a class for us in my graduate class. We got to interview her and talk with her and things. It was really fun. And she gave a lecture. In fact, she was the Arrington Chair lecture this last fall at Utah State University. Great talk. She has a really good book out there called The Next Mormons. This is a really good book I'd recommend getting if you are a church leader or if you're trying to understand how can we improve what we're doing. It's a great book, well worth reading for you. So she talked about some of the data that she found in her book. And she used data from her own survey that she did of Mormons, and she also did a research with the Pew Research on the religious landscape study, as well as U.S. College Freshman Survey and the PRRI data that came in, which is like public survey data. So she pulled from a lot of different sources this information to understand what does it mean to be millennial and Mormon, because these are, as she calls her book, the next Mormons. And what does that mean? How is that going to millennial thoughts and ideas? How's that going to affect the LDS Church? What she found is the group that is in sharpest decline for the first time ever is girls who are white and from low-income families. Most of the time, when you look at who's leaving a church, it's usually more men than women. Women tend to stay in church. Men tend to leave church more. That has changed in the last 20 years. And women are starting to become a greater group leaving the church than men. So we're seeing this shift in perception of what's going on. In fact, she found out that among 18 to 29-year-olds, this was actually found out from Mormon Leaks. There was some data that was leaked from inside the church that found in 2008, 45% of 18 to 29-year-olds were active. 45, so less than half of 18 to 29-year-olds in 2008 were active in the church. So you would be, if you were 25 in 2008, you're going to be, 45, coming on to 45 here pretty soon. Probably about 40 years old right now. So right at the early age of the millennials, the beginning part of the millennials, only less than half are active. As far as 2008 data is from inside the church, actually. That's where they got that from. So in the 2000s, we see a shift in LDS Church. Number of members, if you look at the church statistics, number of members has been growing. The quality of activity of members has been declining quite a bit. If you've been a member of the church for a long time, you've seen this in local congregations, especially in and around Utah, where wards are consolidating because activity levels in certain wards are declining. There's been some challenges that way. So the brethren are worried about that. And so Jenna Reese's book gets into some of this research. She found that there are several factors that seem to be common among people who are leaving the LDS Church, regardless of age, basically. So this is not just millennials, but over everybody, basically. Now, if you have some of these factors yourself, it doesn't mean you're leaving the church. It just means that there's people that have a lot of those similar factors are considering leaving the church. There's some concerns that they have. If you're a church leader, this is a good thing. Write these down. These are really interesting to look at. So she mentioned that if you identify as LGBT, that's one thing that you're interested in not being a member anymore. Or if you're affiliated, you're allied with the LGBTQ groups, you're more likely to decide, I don't want to be a member of this church. If you have close friends and family members who have left the church, you have a greater likelihood of leaving. Having less orthodox religious beliefs means you're more likely at looking at leaving the church. Because if you're like, oh, the church is believing something different than me, and they're not going to change, so I don't know if I want to be a part of that, and leave. Not completing seminary or serving a mission. Those are common things that they see among people who leave the church. Being single and being male has a greater chance of leaving the church. Having parents who divorced before you were age 18, not being politically conservative, not completing college. So again, all these factors by themselves aren't a reason to leave the church. So realize correlation is not causation. These aren't the reasons causing someone to leave the church, okay? They're just, in their data, they're just showing that these are similar commonalities among the people who have left. So the more of these bullet points that you agree with, the more likely it is that you have a challenge with church teachings that are more susceptible to being interested in leaving the church. So if you're male, liberal, single, did not serve a mission or do seminary, you have not gone to college, and you identify with LGBTQ beliefs and have friends and family that have left the church, there's a good chance you could go that way as well. It doesn't guarantee it, but I'm just saying statistically, you could. I wouldn't say this is, again, correlation is not causation. Okay, that's just important. But these are just a bunch of things that happen. So if you're a church leader, like if you're in a bishopric or a stake presidency or something, this list, I would definitely consider looking at this list and rating that compared to who is in our stewardship that meets this criteria the most, and maybe we should be reaching out to them and talking with them more. What can we do to help that group out, basically? So those are things to consider. Really great discussion that we had, really lots of good stuff in her books. Her book, The Next Mormons, is absolutely worth reading. A lot of good statistical data in there to think about what can we do to not have a lost generation within the church, basically. It was really good. So the third lecture that we got into was by a man, let me see if I can get his name up here, Armand Mouse, I believe is how you say his name. If that's not the right way, sorry, I'm sorry, Armand, for that. Short, sweet talk. He got right to the point that there is a tension when it comes to the LDS church as far as like policy changes are concerned. So there's a group of the church that is more progressive in their ideas. They want to see the church change with the times. They want to see updates to policies to meet social challenges of the times. And then there's a group in the church that is more fundamental, and they don't want anything to change. They want it to always stay the same. And the tension between these two groups is where the church leaders have to bridge that gap and say, how do we change these policies? Because if we get too progressive, the fundamentals want to leave the church. If we remain too fundamental, the progressives want to leave the church. And we've seen this. This always happens when policy changes happen. Oftentimes it's a schism point where church members decide to not be members anymore. In 2014 and 2015, we saw that with the change of policy about baptizing children of gay couples. We saw it with the 1978 giving the blacks the priesthood. Some people didn't think that was true and thought David O. McKay was a fallen prophet and left. Around the Manifesto in the 1890s, there was a lot of fundamentalist churches that broke off from the church around polygamy. The succession crisis at Joseph Smith. I mean, there were 6 or 7 groups that broke off that are part of the restoration community of religion, but they are, the RLDS, the Strangites, and the other groups. They broke off because they disagreed with the succession principles with Brigham Young and everybody else. So this happens. And so this is that tension. And that's what he was talking about is with this tension, the church has to navigate how do we shift our policy and how do we help people to not leave the church when a policy is changed. And it was a fun talk, good talk. For my graduate class, my directed readings class, this was our final book that we read, and I really liked it. It's called Undocumented Saints. It's a really cool cover of the book. I liked it a lot. Uh, I have to admit, when we first picked up this book, I thought, man, this is like, oh yeah, Undocumented Saints. This is going to talk about the Latter-day Saints who are immigrating to America and their challenges and problems and issues, and what does that mean to be a Latter-day Saint and an immigrant, even an undocumented one. And that's not what that book was about at all. Not at all. This book is sort of about the people who are coming to America that are undocumented, so they're illegally entering America from Central America, among other places, but mainly Central America. But this book is about the saints that are memorialized and worshipped to help the immigrants who are crossing the border. So in Catholicism, they have the idea of saints. We've heard, St. Peter, St. Thomas, St. Jude. If you remember, we just talked about that book a couple weeks ago. They have saints, these people who are deified in the Catholic Church, who you can pray to, and then they can help you from heaven to either get things in your life done or work with other saints and other people to get stuff done for you on the other side. Those are saints. So there are official saints. What I didn't know until I read this book was there are unofficial saints as well. And they're the undocumented saints, which is the title of the book. So these are saints, they're called vernacular saints. These are saints that are often localized, so they're not worldwide recognition saints, they're more local. So we talked about 4 saints in this book, basically, and how they relate to the crossing of the Mexican-US border. And what does that mean? So these 4 saints, really fascinating stories. I'll kind of give you a quick summary of them. The first one we talked about was Jesus Malverde. He was a gentleman in the late 1800s, early 1900s time frame, so Spanish-American Wars and things like that. He's from that time frame. It is believed he was a real person that lived at that time, but there's not a lot of proof. There's not like a birth certificate or things that he was around. Now, remember, the word Jesus in English spells Jesus. So Jesus Malverde is his name. And you can go look him up and learn more about him. He is venerated as a saint among people who are crossing the border. They pray to him sometimes to get help. They see him as an opportunity to push against some of the challenges of dealing with governments and overreach, and kind of the colonialism ideas, basically. So really interesting saint to look at. The next 2 saints are intertwined. So this is Saint Olguita and Juan Soldado. And they're a little bit more popular. Juan Soldado especially is a little bit more of a popular one, or more well known. So this comes back from a story around the 1920s and 30s, I think 1930, of a little 8-year-old girl who has decided that she doesn't like what her mom is cooking. And they live in a little town in Mexico. Not, I think it's more central Mexico is where the town is. Anyways, the mom's like, if you don't like what I'm cooking for dinner, then you go to the market down the street and get something that you want and bring it back. So she says, okay, I'm gonna go do that. So she takes off, goes down a few blocks to go to the market, buy some stuff that she wants to come back to have for dinner. On her way back, there's a gentleman who was a soldier. They lived near a base down in their little town. This soldier was accused of raping and murdering this little girl. They found her body in a shed that was sometimes used by the military, and they found a sweater that the guy happened to be wearing that day. He was out on guard duty, and the sweater he was wearing actually had some blood on it, some stains, and it was hiding in his house. His girlfriend actually turned that into the police and kind of turned him in. So he went to this trial. They had a swift trial. Whole community is up at arms over this soldier who has brutally raped and murdered this little 8-year-old girl. So lots of back and forth and challenges that were happening. So he is tried, found guilty, and was executed. So the interesting thing about this is looking at the cultural dynamics of how these people become saints. So the little girl becomes a saint. Her name is Saint Olguita. I think that's how you say it, right? Saint Olguita. She becomes a saint for women and women's rights and women's issues, dealing with like violence against women and stuff. So they see her as a protector of women. And because she has experienced violence against her as a woman, that she can now help other women out. So she kind of becomes a saint for that situation. But her attacker becomes a saint as well. Stories start to run around about how, oh, maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was somebody, a government official that actually committed the crime and he was the scapegoat. And so how do we know, it was a swift trial. There's all these people that start to come out of the woodwork with conspiracy theories that maybe he's not guilty. And so he ends up becoming a saint pushing against government overreach as well, where he is seen as resisting the government. He's defending the people against the government type ideas, which way you get in the border. You don't want the government's trying to keep you from crossing the border, and so he's a saint to help you deal with government laws and problems where the government's overreaching and trying to control you. Interestingly enough, the most common place you're probably going to hear about Juan Soldado is in the drug trade. He is this patron saint of Norcos, basically. So even along the border, the author mentioned in this book that artifacts of Juan Soldado, so stickers on cars, emblems on the dashboards of the cars, or images hung from the rearview mirror of the cars, when immigration and police departments are pulling cars over and they see signs of Juan Soldado, they know there's a good chance that whoever owns that car is dealing in the drug trade, because Juan Soldado is seen as going as the patron saint of going against the government. The drug trade is illegal and going against the government, so they've kind of adopted him as their patron saint, which I had no idea that drug runners had a patron saint, but apparently they do. So it's interesting to see how do they shape that and how did that come around. So that was an interesting dynamic. Then we talked about the third. So there's five. Sorry, I said four. There's actually five saints. There's 4 chapters in the book because they put Saint Guido and Juan Soldado in the same chapter. The fourth saint we talked about was Toribio Romo. If you have immigrated or you know somebody who's immigrated, you've probably heard about him. Toribio Romo was a priest, a Catholic priest in the 1930s, 40s timeframe that was murdered during the Cristero Wars. So there was a big battle between the factions in Mexico and the Catholic Church. They kind of pushed the Catholic Church out, and these other groups kind of tried to take over. In these battles, this priest was killed as part of those battles, and he is seen as a very pro-immigration person. In fact, a lot of times he's known as the White Coyote. Coyote is the name of a person who helps get somebody across the border, basically. He's the White Coyote. There's actually legends and stories of this mysterious wanderer who somehow comes walking in out of the desert and finds you as you're struggling to survive, getting through the desert to cross the border, and he helps you get to the next town or helps you get to the next place. Some people say he drives an old pickup and he picks up people and drops them off at the next town, and then he just disappears. And then people are like, who is that guy? I don't know who he was. And then they see a shrine to Toribio Romo and go, that's the guy. That's the guy that helped me. And they're like, dude, he died like 100 years ago. So there's lots of these stories of this guy as some kind of a wandering spirit that is actually helping people get across the border. So a fascinating story to learn from him. He's the only one as far as like he was human and he's done some really good stuff that we see. He was the only priest out of all of them that were canonized. He's the only one out of these 5 that are actually officially recognized by the Catholic Church. Toribio Romo is the only one. um, and if you go to like Detroit, if you go to Oklahoma, you'll see signs of him. There are the areas where immigration is huge. You'll see signs or learn more about Toribio Romo in those areas where there's lots of immigration channels coming through that area. So that was kind of cool. The final saint we talked about was by far the most interesting and colorful out of all of them. This is La Santa Muerte, which means the saint of death, basically. This is a woman. This is the female version of the Grim Reaper, basically. So this is a woman, has hair, has a dress on, has like a flower brooch or something on her, but she's a skeleton. And she is kind of seen as a super saint. Now, she's not recognized as an official saint for the Catholic Church. So she's kind of a champion of people who struggle. As the saint of death, she's the saint that everybody has to meet when they die. She picks people up and takes them to the next life, deals with them. So she's kind of a saint of justice, if you will. Like if you're not being good, she's going to come after you. So they see a lot. There's a lot of value in what she is. She represents for the saint and for the communities in Mexico. She is so if you've ever been to a place in Central America or South America and you see these shrines and people, they do these festivals to saints and you're like, I've never heard about that saint. Who's that person? I don't know. These are the vernacular saints. These are the local saints, the non-official saints that is happening. So that's what this book is about. So she's an interesting one because they see her as more important than most of the saints. She's more important than the Virgin Mary, but not quite as important as Christ. She's almost equal with Christ because Christ deals with resurrection and living, but she deals with people that are dying and going to heaven and things, or hell. So they kind of see her as a super saint in a way. She's also seen as the patron saint of LGBTQ because she's a skeleton that dresses as a woman, so she could be a man dressing as a woman. She doesn't have genitalia, basically, so anybody who's non-binary can see in her value. So that was really interesting to see that perspective and how these saints are developed to help people deal with problems and challenges in their life and address issues that they're having. So it was a really fun read, really interesting book. It's a relatively new book. In fact, my professor picked it, he said, because he hadn't read it yet, and he heard it was a really highly acclaimed book. So if you want to understand the unofficial side of sainthood in Catholic Church, it's a fascinating read. The introduction and the conclusion we talked about in class, it's really scholarly stuff, but the stories inside are really fun to read. The research that this person did on this book is a phenomenal. Like the researcher, the author of this book, went to some of these saint festivals for these saints. He went down and visited the graveside where the guy that Juan Soldado is of, and Saint Olguita and them, and talked with the families and the descendants and the people around this. So tremendous research that he's done for this book. If you're Catholic and want to see a little bit different side of Catholicism, this is an interesting book to read. If you're not Catholic but want to learn more, it was a fun book to read. So that was our final concluding book of the semester. It was a fun read, really interesting things just different ways to think about how are saints created and how do they become important to people and how they are resources for help in their life. So that was kind of a fun thing to think about. So that's the conclusion of fall semester. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. Now I'm not going away. I've got 4 or 5 books we're going to talk about in the next few weeks for next semester. I've got an Old Testament class. I've got another interfaith class. We're going to do conflict resolution challenges and things there. And then I've got my senior seminar class, which is a directed readings type course where we get really deep. And I think we're diving deep into Genesis, the creation stories and things. So that'll be fun to get into. So more fun books to come up that we're going to talk about. And I got a whole bunch of other books I'm going to try to read as well. And we'll discuss those. So next week, we'll start talking about those books. And next week, I'll have my paper, my final paper done for my graduate class about the Articles of Faith. And I'll go over the research with you in that and what I'm learning and where I'm going to go with that research. So that'll be next week. So I look forward to talking to you more then.